everyone. I'm Kyle Hackley, lawyer, mother, grandmother, and now author. Welcome back to the Are You Annie podcast, and thank you for joining me for episode 2. In our last episode, we talked about the trauma associated with narcissism, and we used Annie Black's story of survival as an example of the search for freedom from a toxic, controlling relationship. We explored some of the signs of narcissistic behavior, such as manipulation and control, and how these dynamics escalate over time. I use Annie's story as an example because I believe the Annies of the world, that is, women everywhere who have endured narcissistic abuse, share the same experience at its very core. The details may vary, the circumstances, the relationships, even the way they're abused or manipulates them. It all varies, but the impact, the reality of what's happening to them, that remains the same. It's the gaslighting, the fear, the isolation, the slow erosion of self-worth, just with different players and different settings. That's why Annie's story matters. It's not just hers. It's a story of so many others who are still searching for a way out. Today, we're going to go deeper. We'll analyze a moment from Undercurrent that reveals just how dangerous Annie's husband, Santino, was. And I'm not talking about just his actions, I'm talking about his words. The moment I'll read to you highlights the fear, power struggles, and heartbreaking loss that shaped Annie's reality. So let's get to our new material, starting with thank you to all of those who reached out to me this week. You shared your thoughts, your personal experiences. I want you to know that I hear you. To respect your privacy, we'll continue to communicate on the Are You Annie private email. Now let's step back into Annie's world and let's hear what happened to her on that day when she lost her beloved beagle, Sophie. In this scene, finally tell someone what happened to her. That wasn't easy for Annie to do. Let me read an excerpt from the book. Annie hadn't wanted to reveal her past, but she finally gives in. His name is Santino, she says. He saw where Sophie had nibbled on the stool to my vanity. Annie chews on her fingernail before continuing. The incident threw Santino into a rage. Annie lightly touches her fingertips like the steeple on a building and bows her head until her fingertips reach her nose. The sound of Santino's voice would change as fast as his mood. He almost growled like an animal. That mongrel of yours is dangerous. His lips were tight, and the bones in Santino's neck were sticking out. He grabbed my forearm and dragged me to the back door. Santino pointed to the trash cans where the tip of the stool's pedestal was still visible, and I could see where Sophie had chewed on it. Annie lowers her hands and clenches her fists together. I remember running through the house screaming Sophie's name. Santino never liked my little beagle and resented me for adopting the dog in the first place. Then Santino screamed, "Stop looking. The dog isn't here and isn't coming back." I can still see the smug look on his face. I threw myself down on the bed and cried. Santino picked me up by both ankles, lifted me upside down, and started to shake me. "Don't question my judgment again," he said. Then he dropped me on the bed and left the room. I never found out what happened to my little Sophie. This passage is heartbreaking. Annie's story is one of survival, of course, but at this moment, the loss of Sophie is so much more than about her losing her dog. It's about control. Santino knew that Sophie was important to Annie. He resented the beagle and the love Annie showed to her little dog. And in Santino's twisted need for dominance, he took that love away from Annie. Let's break it down. The first thing in that scene that stands out to me is the weaponization of Santino's voice. He goes from 0 to 100 in an instant. He growls to control Annie, and he needs to control what she loves too. So he robs her of that dog and puts Annie in a state of fear, not to mention isolation. Physical intimidation, of course, that's there too. He drags Annie, shakes her, he turns her upside down, and reminds her she is powerless in his eyes. So what's the psychological impact of all of this? Santino made Annie afraid in her own home. She felt helpless. That goes so far beyond physical abuse. It's emotional warfare. Survivors of abuse, they don't just walk away with physical scars. Often they don't even have that physical evidence from their abuser. They carry something much worse. It's the mental scars. Bruises fade, mental scars don't. To my listeners, I ask, have you ever witnessed someone using their voice as a weapon? Have you ever known someone who took pleasure in making another person feel small? For sure, we know it's not love, and of course it's not protection. It's power and control, and sometimes it's disguised as concern. Let's look at a simple example. Imagine a woman is having lunch with her friend. She's enjoying herself, she's catching up, and maybe she's even lost track of time. She's 5 or 10 minutes late. Then suddenly her husband shows up at the restaurant. He rushes over to her table. He's out of breath and he says, "Oh my God, I was so worried about you. You were gone longer than I thought." To an outsider, it might seem like he's just caring about his wife. In reality, in this example anyway, the husband is tracking his wife's movements, making her feel guilty for enjoying her time away from him. His control is subtle, but it is control. And it's abusive. Now imagine this happening. The next time the wife goes out, she starts checking her watch every few minutes. She texts her husband updates so he's not worrying about her. But eventually, she just stops going out at all because it's easier than dealing with her husband's concern. That's not love. That's control wrapped in a disguise of care. And that's what Santino did to Annie. He made her question herself, feel responsible for his emotions, his reactions, and his anger. But that's not the worst part. Annie and women like her, they can't even talk about it. If they try to explain how their husband's actions make them feel, how his concern really isn't concern at all, it's about control, that woman, at least Annie, we know she was risking looking like the bad guy. To outsiders, the husband is just a caring man, checking on his wife. So if she voices discomfort to someone else, she risks sounding ungrateful, paranoid, or even cruel. Because she's left to keep all these things in her head, because she's left to keeping all of these things in her head, she starts to question herself. She asks, am I overreacting again? Am I being unfair? Am I just being overly sensitive? The cycle of abuse continues because as long as she doubts her own instincts, he never has to change. And that's how control works. It's quiet, it's insidious, and it's designed to make the victim doubt themselves. Whether it's a shifting voice made to be a weapon, or a husband simply showing up under the guise of care. Thank you for joining me on this emotional episode of the Are You Annie podcast. I know this was a heavy topic, but it's important These stories need to be told because someone out there needs to hear them. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever seen someone use their voice as a weapon? Have you ever experienced or witnessed control disguised as concern? Please share your thoughts with me on social media, my YouTube channel, Spotify, or even by my private email. And before you leave, would you please hit the subscribe button? Until then, take care of yourself. You are stronger than you think. I want you to be tenacious and never give up on what's important to you. Thank you again.